going to Rushanara, please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. So
Good afternoon.
I want to focus the Dame Gloucester's recommendation 13, where she said the Treasury bodies should work with the FCA to ensure the legislative framework enables the FCA to intervene promptly and effectively in the marketing and sale through technology platforms and unregulated intermediaries. You've already touched on some of the wider points about regulation and enforcement, but in this case and a number of others are exposing the limits to consumer protection with current regulation. You've got, Minister, the online harms bill,
online safety bill.
Can you just talk us through what your thinking is around using the online harms bill to provide more protection? The governor of the Bank of England, when he was reflecting on his time in the FCA, was also talking about the need for using the bill to provide more consumer protection on this agenda.
Thank you, Rushanara. The online safety bill will be coming in the next session. I welcome the pre-legislative scrutiny that the Secretary of State for DCMS has agreed to. I think that will give us an opportunity to explore how and where fraud fits into that. I think that is welcome, because I think that this is an area that does need serious thought. I think this report does really expose the challenge that exists with the fact that so many financial services products are marketed online. We are working very closely with DCMS on a separate piece of work around the online advertising program. Mm-hmm. We have a situation at the moment where ads through platforms are accessed by the public.
Yeah.
And there is a question, when a platform takes a fee to host something, well, what is their responsibility? It seems to me if they are doing something with that ad and there is an active exchange with the entity that's putting up that ad, then there must be some responsibility that lies there for the underlying integrity and probity of what is being advertised. So this is something that we're looking at with DCMS. And then subsequently, the online safety bill in pre-legislative scrutiny, we will look at the issue of fraud and how that should fit into that or not.
So should given the weight of support for using the online harms bill, should we expect you and colleagues in DCMS to be able to be using that piece of legislation to actually address this particular problem that's been exposed by the LCF scandal? Could you confirm that we're definitely going to see some results in terms of tightening up the legislation to protect consumers? Yes or no?
Well, pre-legislative scrutiny hasn't happened yet, so we'll see what happens through that process.
So would you like to use and see that happen? The former head of the FCA has set out that he'd like to see this bill being used to close these loopholes. Would you like to see that? Is this something that you think would be valuable, and can you confirm that you will make this happen?
Well, I don't have unilateral right to decide on this, but I do think that we've got to deal effectively with fraud. And it seems to me that the online safety bill is an area which may provide that vehicle. And I look forward to exploring and seeing how that fraud issue is explored in that pre-legislative scrutiny. If it's not, then we'll need to find another way of coming to deal with this really important challenge that we can't let go by. I mean, and that's why in the meantime, the advertising program, we're having round tables with the platforms and the tech companies, with the Home Office, following conversations I've had with UK Finance to get to grips with where responsibilities lie in this area. I've described where I think there are some gaps, and we need to come to terms with that.
Yeah, and so you talk about advertising, that's really welcome, the work you're doing with the Home Office and others. So would you agree with Martin Lewis when he talks about the need for the telecoms regulator, Ofcom, to be given new powers to force online platforms such as Facebook and Twitter to take stronger action on user-generated scams?
Well, what I think is that we need a joined-up approach across government. I think when we've got a significant piece of legislation imminently going to be scrutinised, that will be the process for putting all these options on the table and coming out with a coherent response. I think that's the best way to do it, so that people can be reassured that we're looking at all the options. Martin Lewis always makes a very useful and clear contribution to this discussion, and I will look at that very carefully.
Great. And Dame Elizabeth told the committee about the issue of unauthorised cowboys operating online, and you've exposed some of the challenges, both in answer to my questions and also Dame Angela's about cross-governmental working. Are you going to sort these cowboys out, Minister?
Well, I obviously want to see improvements to the regulation, and I want to see the public to be reassured about what they can access and the integrity of what they can access. So I stand ready to work with law enforcement agencies, with the Home Office, with DCMS to improve the legislative framework so that less harm can be caused to particularly vulnerable consumers who have been obviously taken advantage of, in this case by a criminal activity, but can often be taken advantage of by unscrupulous actors. Of course, I will do everything I can.
So, and just to pick up, Charles Randall told the committee that there are two options that were proposed in the Treasury's July 2020 consultation paper on the regulatory framework for approval of financial promotions. You're familiar with them, but I'll just reiterate them for the audience. One being to restrict approval of the financial promotions of unauthorised firms through impositions of requirements by the FCA, and the other being to specify that the approval of financial promotions communications by unauthorised persons is a regulated activity by FSMA. Can you say what your view is on which one? Charles Randall talked about making the approving financial promotions a regulated activity would be a huge help. What's your view of the two options?
I think the issue is, what are we? Who is going to access, financial, what financial products? We've got some challenges here with respect to, getting that balance right between, allowing high net worth investors and sophisticated investors who currently have certain criteria to be able to access certain products. We banned these sort of mini bonds to be able accessible to the general public, and we've got to get that balance right. I'm nervous about saying, well, only extremely wealthy people can access certain products. But I'm equally unhappy about a situation where there's an inherent vulnerability built into a lack of restraint. So, I will, do what's required to protect people, but not to withdraw the right of people to make investments as part of a balanced portfolio of risk for people that have got more means available.
Right. Okay. So earlier on, you talked about 30 mini bonds that that had over the past year, the past
7 years,
7 years that you'd identified. We can see the proliferation of the targeting of quote unquote the not less sophisticated investors. In terms of people who've got, access to lots of advice before they go on to invest. We've also seen pension freedoms and so on. So people want to invest. When it comes to FCA investigations and so on, and we've seen from the evidence sessions, the FCA has to often balance the responsibility of, as you say, prudential regulation and the breadth of activity that it's responsible for. And what often happens is that ordinary citizens who find themselves victims of these scams the impact on them is, it takes a long time, as you've seen with this case, to get redress, to get to the bottom of these things. So the legislative framework that you're talking about, and the fact that this is a cross-departmental responsibility, one of my concerns, and I think it's shared by, I'm sure, shared by other colleagues on this committee, is that this could fall between stools. So can you just talk us through what the framework is going to be within government? Is there a subcommittee that is looking at, you mentioned the advertising element to legislation. Is there a particular subcommittee that will look at these issues in the round between DCMS, Home Office and Treasury, with a lead, whether it's you or other ministers, that can drive this through, so we can be assured that there will be proper consumer protection around these sorts of unauthorized or not regulated types of products, because it's proliferating, and every single day, we come across new scams. Some of us have been targeted by them ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, we have the strategic Crime Board, which is co-chaired by the Chancellor and the Home Secretary. And that involves representatives from DCMS and law enforcement agencies, and is an attempt to bring all of this together. As I was beginning to say to Dame Angela earlier, there are obviously different lead responsibilities. The Home Office is the Fraud Policy Cabinet Office for countering that sort of public sector fraud. We're responsible for FS, DWP for pension scams. You can see the logic for those different responsibilities. And then obviously the FCA is responsible for, preventing fraud and pursuing those that are, about enforcement of regulation.
So can I just check?
Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, John, can I just check? Will that board look at these impending pieces of legislation to answer the questions that we've been exploring today, so that we don't have a situation where DCMS is focused on its priorities and this particular agenda gets lost in the kind of rush to get the legislation through and so on? Whether that is is that the place where this is going to be squared?
Well, I think it's important to know, to express how joined up government can be. I've been in close contact with my colleagues in DCMS over these matters and have made strong representations on this. I think it might be helpful to bring in Catherine Braddock here, who might more effectively talk to the nature of collaboration on this issue across government. Catherine, would it be possible for you to come in?
Yeah, so there are two sets of very complex overlapping issues here, very clearly, which the committee is focusing on. There's a broad government agenda to address online safety, both through the promotion of fraud using online platforms, and specifically the advertising used on platforms and its role in fraud. And as the Minister has been describing, through ministerial and official routes, we work closely with the colleagues in DCMS and the Home Office in the lead on those issues to ensure that financial services and conduct interests are integrated into that legislative, there's a legislative package on safety, and there's a DCMS programme on online advertising. There's then a sort of a broader set of questions about conduct, financial promotions, and what is in and outside of the perimeter, which is more narrowly within the gift, some of it exclusively of the Financial Conduct Authority and some of it of the Treasury, where we can legislate. And in those areas where we can act, we do act. So we have not waited to, for example, well, the FCA has not waited to strengthen the financial promotions regime. We are not waiting in order to strengthen the regulatory gateway for financial promotions, because that extends beyond the question of online. But is exclusively a question about financial services. So you could, I hope that doesn't sound evasive, but what I'm trying to describe is two very broad sets of interests which overlap in the area of online activity, essentially, where there's quite a developed process at official and ministerial level to connect those, but where we don't need to do that, and where we can just pursue the harms and the dangers we see, both we and the regulators do simply proceed.